If you want what's real about God, got to be real about your repenting.
Get up and pray.
If you keep fumbling around and being distracted, then the good things that I have for you is gonna get missed.
Get up and pray.
We're supposed to be empathetic. That's a characteristic that we should carry. It's not our identity. Yeah.
Exactly.
Get up and pray.
So we have to be careful with the words that we use to describe ourselves, or the words that we use, especially around new believers. So there's a lot of new age terminology being thrown out there, and people are using that as their identity, and it's false.
Get up and pray. Today we're just going to be doing a read through of Samuel. We're going to be reading about David and Goliath.
What are we going to for Samuel? What?
No, chapter 17.
Cool.
I guess before we get into the actual read of David and Goliath, we can give kind of a backstory about like what's going on, who's the king and who's why it's in Samuel. So I guess kind of to give everybody an idea of what's happening. Samuel, he pretty much goes to Saul and tells Saul that God told him God told me to tell you that you need to go destroy the Amalekites, Amalek, and all his descendants, every bit of his property, just completely destroy it. Well, Saul, being the Saul that he is, he went and he kind of picked and chose what he wanted to keep out of all the plunder, I guess, what he did. So he upset God, and he was rebuked by Samuel the prophet, who then goes and he anoints David. And David's going to be the topic of tonight. So we're going to be studying about David and Goliath, which is found in chapter 17. This is a young David. Now, this isn't old David. So do we just want to straight read through chapter 17?
Yeah, we can read through it first, and then, I don't know. We can read a few verses or whatever at a time, and if we get anything out of it, we could pause or trade off or whatever.
Yeah, if something pops into somebody's head and they want to talk about it further, go ahead and do that. All right, I'll start us off. I'm going to send who else wants to read it. Starting 1 Samuel chapter 17. Now the Philistines gathered their armies for battle, and they were gathered at Soka, which belonged to Judah. And they camped between Soka and Azekah, we'll say Azekah, that sounds right. In Ephes, wow, there's a lot of names in here that I didn't know I wouldn't be able to pronounce. In Ephes Damim, Saul and the men of Israel were assembled and camped in the valley of Elah, and they drew up the battle formation to confront the Philistines. The Philistines were standing on the mountain on one side, while Israel was standing on the mountain on the other side, with the valley between them. So it's kind of painting this image of the Philistines up on this one big mountainous hill, and like this whole battle scene, like we can picture it in our head now, right? We got the Israelites on one side, the Philistines on the other, a big valley dip in between them. Then a champion came forward from the army encampment of the Philistines named Goliath from Gath. His height was 6 cubits in a span. I want to look that up and find out what 6 cubits is like in like modern day English.
Did it add something in after those 6 cubits? You said 6 cubits and a span?
6 cubits and a span, yeah.
That's
1 cubit is approximately 18 inches.
6 times 1.5.
So they're saying 9 feet, 9 inches.
And a span.
So a good 10 feet, over 10 and some change.
So his height was 10 feet tall. And he had a bronze helmet on his head, and he wore scale armor, which weighed 5,000 shekels of bronze. That makes me have to Google that too, because I need to know.
I think I remember looking this up at one point in time, and this is some heavy armor.
Yeah, bronze already is heavy.
5,000 shekels made 1,250 ounces, which is 78 pounds. 78 pounds of armor.
For his helmet. His helmet was 78 pounds.
Yeah.
Dang, that's crazy.
He also had bronze greaves on his legs and bronze sabers slung between his shoulders. So this dude was just loaded down a couple of 100 pounds of armor and weaponry.
He was ready for close combat.
The shaft of his spear was like a weaver's beam. The head of the spear weighed 600 shekels of iron, and his shield carrier walked in front of him. Oh man, I'd hate to be that dude's shirt
His-
carrier.
No, that's it. His shield weight was so heavy compared to the rest of the armor. He missed some. It was the shaft of his spear was like a weaver's beam, and the head of his spear weighed 600 shekels of iron. So the spearhead weighed 600 shekels of iron. So of course, I'm sure he's got somebody carrying his shield in front of him. Like this guy is carrying so much weight. And just all the weaponry. I'm sure they probably had to appoint somebody to carry his shield in front of him. Like he didn't have enough arms to do it.
It almost seems like they're fixing to go up against other giants. Like they've got themselves
Right?
poised to go up against some bad.
That's a good point. That's a very good point. Like I said, close combat. Well, I'll let you finish reading, but it makes sense why. Like if we notice all of the wars and the battles that God sends His people through, there's always an unorthodox plan to victory.
And like he says, 600 shekels is 100. Oh my goodness, his spearhead weighed 125 pounds.
600 shekels of iron. I like how they weighed stuff is all based off of.
The material.
Yeah.
Yeah, 120. So he had 78. So just to give you guys an idea, the average human head weighs about 8 pounds. The average human neck can withstand about 15 pounds-ish of weight in either direction. A 10-foot tall dude was wearing an almost 80-pound helmet. We do 15 pounds. He was wearing an almost 80-pound helmet. And then on the end of his stick, he had a 125-pound spearhead on it. How big was that spear? Can you imagine how big the spearhead was? It probably was about as long as one of my arms. Like, I can imagine that spearhead was probably every bit of I don't know, 24 or 48 inches?
Yeah, I was gonna guess about 3 feet.
Yeah.
Just to be proportionally proper. You know what I mean? It's a spearhead, so it has to be, balanced in order just to be effective in battle. So the weight has to be evenly distributed. 125 pounds evenly distributed, that's a few feet trying to, even that weight out.
Absolutely.
And then it has to be, sharpened and fashioned into a spear point. And so that means the back end is a little bit bigger than, that's crazy. How long was the pole? They said there was a pole. How long they said with the pole in order to carry that? So the pole
It was like a weaver's beam.
How long is a weaver's? Oh, a weaver's beam is about 6 foot long. Hang on, let me look it up. I don't have one anymore. I don't remember how long.
More than 5 feet long.
Yeah.
The staff or the pole of the weapon was as tall as my wife.
Absolutely, and about 2.5 inches thick. Now, a loom with a warp beam is about 30 yards long, but no, an average weaver's beam is about 5 foot long and 2.25 inches thick.
Yeah, that's hefty for sure. I wouldn't want to get caught under that thing.
I wouldn't want to be the one carrying it, or the shield, or just like, and when he's swinging it, you got like, where does he practice at? Like, we gotta be by yourself, alone in the field, however big, in order just to practice, just to train.
That's incredible.
The incredible part is the way but David had no fear. Looking at it, I'm saying, yeah, we still in the beginning. We still in the beginning.
I'll continue to read unless somebody else wants to pick it up.
I can pick it up if you want me to. Starting in verse 8, it said, he stood and shouted to the ranks of Israel and said to them, Goliath did, why do you come out to draw up in battle array? Am I not the Philistine, and you servants of Saul? Choose a man for yourselves and let him come down to me. If he is able to fight with me and kill me, then he will become your servants. But if I prevail against him and unalive him, then you shall become our servants and serve us. So he's making demands already. Like he's already saying he's negotiating terms. And this already crawls under my skin because we've got this huge dude. Like at this point, if you can do anything, let's, let war be war. But it just reminds me of how my children are constantly trying to negotiate terms. Yeah. If I do all the dishes, can I have? But no, he says, if he is able to fight with me and unalive me, then we will become your servants. But if I prevail against him and unalive him, then you shall become our servants and serve us. Again, the Philistines said, I defy the ranks of Israel this day. Give me a man that we may fight together. This guy is like, he's ready. He's ready to throw hands. I know lots of people like this in my life, like just that as soon as the opportunity arises. There's there's things in my life that make me this kind of person where the opportunity would arise and I'm like, I'm ready, let's go. But he's almost like taunting them. When Saul and all Israel heard these words of the Philistine, they were dismayed and greatly afraid. Now David was the son of the Ephraite of Bethlehem in Judah, whose name was Jesse, and he had 8 sons. And Jesse was old in these days of Saul, advanced in years among men. The 3 older sons of Jesse had gone after Saul to the battle, and the names of his 3 sons who went to the battle were Eliab, the firstborn, and the second to him, Abinadab, and the third, Shema. David was the youngest. Now the 3 oldest followed Saul, but David went back and forth from Saul to tend his father's flock at Bethlehem. The Philistine came forward morning and evening for 40 days and took his stand. So they're saying, like, Goliath came out here for more than a month, come down to the valley and taunted the Israelites. Like he wasn't going to give up. They really wanted this to happen. It sounds like they were ready to, they were ready to go. Then Jesse said to David, his son, take now for your brothers an ephah of this roasted grain and these 10 loaves and run to the camp of your brothers. Bring also these 10 cuts of cheese to the commander of their 1,000 and look into the welfare of your brothers and bring back news of them. For Saul and they and all the men of Israel are in the valley of Elah fighting with the Philistines. So it's pretty much giving us a, like, how this happened, how David even really got involved kind of thing. Jesse, being as old as he is, obviously can't take care of his wealth. We know in previous books that David is a young shepherd after his father, which I think is wonderful. I think that's absolutely beautiful that a son is going to take on his father's everything and keep it going. So David is running between front lines where the king is, because I'm guessing Saul and Jesse are pretty close. Jesse's got 8 sons. The oldest 3 are already on front lines with Saul. It sounds like they're very important soldiers to Saul. They made mention of them, and we know from previous and other books in the Bible that if your name is mentioned, you're an important figure. And if your name is not mentioned, but you're talked about, you're an important lesson. So Jesse's 3 oldest sons are important to King Saul in this fight and this war. Jesse is asking David now at this point in time, take the pretty much a big portion of food and take it to your brothers and their encampment and please just bring me back good word. Like, take food, get as much information as what's going on as possible, and please bring me back good word, is what I'm getting from this, because Jesse's just, he can't go get word himself, and it doesn't sound like anybody else is bringing word out to him at this point. Am I good? Everybody catching what? Sounds good. You guys want me to keep going, or does somebody want to pick up? I ended on verse 19.
Emily, are you in a place where you can read?
I'm absolutely in a place I can read.
I don't want to step on toes.
Oh, I don't either. Let's see here. She can read down to the next, down to 32. Or some. I'm reading out of the NLT, so I don't want to throw it off.
Yeah, I can read down to 32. So starting at verse 20, it says the portion of this is named David Accepts the Challenge. So David arose early in the morning and left the flock with a keeper and took the supplies and went as Jesse has commanded him. And he came to the circle of the camp while the army was going out in a battle array, shouting the war cry. I have to read that again to understand what I read. And he came to the circle of a camp while the army was going out in the battle array, shouting the war cry. Okay, I thought for a second, to me it sounded like David was shouting the war cry. No, he walked in on the army as it was shouting the war cry. Israel and the Philistines drew up in the battle array, army against army. Then David left his baggage in the care of a baggage keeper and ran to the battle line and entered in order to greet his brothers. As he was talking with them, behold, the champion, the Philistine from Gath named Goliath, was coming up from the army of the Philistines. And he spoke these same words, and David heard them. When all of the men of Israel saw the man, they fled from him and were greatly afraid. The men of Israel said, "Have you seen the man who is coming up? Surely he is coming up to defy Israel. And it will be that the king will enrich the man who kills him, unalives him with the great riches, and will give him his daughter and make his father's house free in Israel." Okay, so at that, I'm guessing is talking about taxes. So taxing people's property is by the government has been going on for a long time. Yeah, I had to go down because it's marked in my Bible. It says down at the bottom that that makes his father's property free from taxes and public service. So that means that the house would no longer have to submit children for the draft either. That's quite the deal. That paints a story of how scared of Goliath everybody was. The king was willing to not only give his daughter to the man who defeats Goliath, he was also willing to make that man's house, that man's home property, free of taxes and free of having to serve in the king's armies, any of the public service eras. So like they pulled people from different houses. It was like a lottery drawing of the different homes and the properties on who you had to present, and you had to bring your kids up in a certain way to learn these things also. Like a lot of people, their lives were chosen for them long before they got a chance to even start getting an idea of what it was that they liked to do. Like, I know that it mentioned that Jesse had 8 sons. 3 of them were already serving in Saul's army and were out on the front lines because David went to his brothers and was able to hear what Goliath was saying. So that solidifies that David's eldest brothers served really important roles in Saul's army. It says here in verse 26, it goes on, "Then David spoke to the men who were standing by him, saying, 'What will be done for the man who kills this Philistine and takes away the reproach from Israel? For who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should taunt the armies of the living God?'" Ooh, David. David had an attitude like, I love seeing these things. You know, David is probably my favorite character in the book. Listen to that again. "David spoke to the men who were standing by him, saying, 'What will be done for the man who unalives this Philistine and takes away the reproach from Israel? For who is this uncircumcised Philistine?'" Like, he's already throwing insults. He's already throwing shade, y'all. "Who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should taunt the armies of the living God?" David already knows who he serves. David already knows who Israel serves. It's sounding like he's standing among a large group of men who may have forgotten who they serve. And their fear in what they can see in the situation that they've been thrown in right now, this right now situation, because that's how short-minded we as people are. We are very, very short-minded. We can't see past what is in front of us right now to see that we serve the living God. David knew. He's like, who is this guy to be standing here saying anything to any of us about anyone? The people answered him in accord with this word, saying, "Thus it will be done for the man who unalives him." Meaning, like, I get the feeling that they don't feel like anybody's going to be able to do it, which is why I see this as a test. It reveals character and our dependence and trust in God. Amen. I like that. Yeah, it goes on to say, "The people answered him in accord with this word, saying, 'Thus it will be done for the man who unalives him.' Now Eliab, his oldest brother, heard when he spoke to the men, and Eliab's anger burned against David. And he said, 'Why have you come down? Okay. And with whom have you left those few sheep in the wilderness?'" Oh, his brother's like, "How dare you leave our daddy?" Oh my goodness. Okay.
That was his responsibility, and they're the brothers.
Yeah.
What like kind of how we hear when Logan gets on to Sammy for something.
Not even that. Like it's when I walk in on they're supposed to be all 3 kids are in the kitchen listening to your and I's conversation, and they've got all of our meals that we just prepared for dinner sitting on the kitchen table alone in a room full of cats.
I want to bring it back a little bit. You said they were talking, all these people were talking about what's going on, and then David came up and he started throwing some shade, like, who is this, uncircumcised brute that says that about our God? And everybody else, instead of actually stepping up as men of Israel, they were like, "Oh, well, if you take him out, you get this, and this." Yep. They weren't even owning up to their responsibility at that point. They were still like, you could get all the great stuff That's messed up.
Yeah. But this shows how much fear was in everyone. Everyone. That shows how much fear can keep you away from God and what he has for you. Just being afraid of taking that step forward, just being afraid of the uncomfortable that is going to be temporary. They're missing out. I mean, this is pretty much what brings David to be king, is this fight right here.
Emily says temptation. Yeah, and
Temptation.
you saw how David responded to that temptation.
Yeah.
At all. He like completely ignored it and went straight into
He completely
justifiably angry that they were saying what they were saying about the God of Israel.
Yeah. Well, it's not that Goliath was saying anything about the God of Israel. It was that who was he to stand against the armies of God? Like, he was acknowledging who they were as a people. Yeah, David was mad because, who is anybody to stand against Israel? We are God's armies. We are God's people. David was already making claim for who they were when nobody else was. At this point in time, you see where God's people have full on put their dependence in a king that can't do anything for them. Another man, another human being, put their full dependence in somebody who is currently failing them, who is currently making promises to the person to come forward and win his battle for him. When all throughout the word, we see where when we put our trust in God, God wins our battles for us. God steps forward in that armor.
The reason why at the very beginning that I brought up kind of the backstory of Saul and why he is no longer favored like he was supposed to be, or just that, because I mean there's a point to it. Like, Saul was favored at one point. He had a blessing, Samuel prayed a blessing, or anointing or whatever, and screwed up. He went and got greedy. He wanted what he wanted. He wanted the best of the pillaging, and in turn kind of remained in his curse. And that's where, Goliath and the Philistine army was able to take advantage and move in like they did.
I think that you see that in the fact that they're saying it's King Saul's army instead of God's army. You know what I mean? Like, it's instead of it being the army of God's people, or it's very much so like who's following Saul, like who's gonna step in for, but you see where David steps in and says, what was it exactly that he said? Who is this? I just went right past it. Sorry. Yeah. So in the NLT, it says it a little bit differently. He says, "What will a man get for unaliving this Philistine and ending his defiance of Israel? Who is this pagan Philistine anyway, that he is allowed to defy the armies of the living God?" See how he says the armies of the living God, whereas everyone else is talking about King Saul's army. So that's why I said something about the temptation, that being a testing, is that testing is like that. This is like it just was ironic to me that it was 40 days that the
Goliath
was stepping out and saying, hey, come on out. Whoever thinks they're big enough, come fight me. And so that happened for 40 days. If you think about that in the testing of Saul, Saul, remember who put you where you are. And Saul he forgot that he was leaning on his own understanding and his own strength and his own whatever, instead of leaning into the God, just like what David does. I just find it very interesting that even with the anointing that Saul had on his life, for him to not remember that God put him in this position, that God would not have allowed him to step into this, but because it's a battle that could have already been won if they were to recognize that they were there as God's, the armies of the living God.
Now, we got to the point where Eliab, David's brother, starts kind of chewing him out. Why do you think he really chewed him out? Because we know it wasn't just because of that. I mean, I'm getting it. I kind of feel like he probably did it because David put him in his place.
David came in and made him look like a punk.
Exactly. Like, David put him in his place and he got mad and he was like, aren't you herding some sheep right now? You know what I mean? Like,
so what does the rest of 28 say for you guys?
It says, Eliab's anger burned against David, and he said, "Why have you come down? And with whom have you left those few sheep in the wilderness? I know your insolence and the wickedness of your heart, for you have come down in order to see the battle."
So
He's calling him out as a little punk.
So the NLT says the oldest brother, Eliab, heard David talking about to the men, and he was angry. "What are you doing around here anyway?" he demanded. "What about those few sheep you're supposed to be taking care of?" Like almost in a belittling way, right? Like to make it sound like what it is that he's supposed to be doing is insignificant compared to what it is that the others are doing. "I know about your pride and deceit. You just want to see the battle." To me, it sounds like that they're being, his brother is like, "Why are you here in the first place? You're supposed, like, you've got some little job. You're not even supposed to be around this battle. You just want to see battle. We know that that's what you, like, you've wanted to be a part of this army for such a long time that's what this is about." And so that he's trying to cut down on where David stands. So I'm curious to see what 29 says for you guys.
But David said, "What have I done now? Was it not just a question?"
As mine says,
I'd like to see these brothers fighting.
Mine says, "What have I done now?" David replied, "I was only asking a question." But it makes it very clear. I mean, if you think about it, like, I've been that sibling before. It's like, what have I done? Like, what? Or we've all had those moments. Like, what have I done now? I was just merely asking. There was nothing else. I was simply inquiring about what was going on. I haven't been here, so I don't know.
It sounds more like David's literally dumbfounded. Like he just showed up expecting to see the great army of the living God, and instead he sees a bunch of cowards that say they're representing Saul.
Absolutely.
Yep. A bunch of cowards that then cut him down like little brother.
Yeah, he shows up and he's like, who's gonna step up to this guy? And everybody else is like, "Oh, well, you know, if you do it, you'll get this in return."
Yeah.
So 29 reads that. 30 reads, "Then he turned away from him to another and said the same thing. And the people replied with the same words as before." So he's literally like grabbing people like, "Hey, who's gonna step up to this dude?"
And they just tell him what the king's going to give him. Whoever can win, the king's going to give him this. Nobody wants to own it. When the words which David spoke were heard, they told them to Saul. Ooh. When the words which David spoke were heard, they told them to Saul, and he sent for him. David said to Saul, "Let no man's heart fail on account of him. Your servant will go and fight this Philistine." Okay, so he apparently went around and had enough to say that King Saul was like, "All right, we got a contender. We have a contender. Let's bring him in." And David says, "Let no man's heart fail on account of him. Your servant will go and fight with this Philistine."
What does he mean by that, to let no heart fail on account? He's not giving people heart attacks, you know? I think it's because they're also scared. They lack heart.
So in the NLT, it says, "Don't worry about this Philistine. I'll go fight him." It doesn't say anything about let no heart fail. It just says, "Don't worry about this Philistine." David told Saul, "I'll go fight him."
Another translation, NIV, says, "Let no one lose heart on account of this Philistine."
Meaning, like, don't let the Israelites be concerned.
Yeah, don't let them scare you. Don't let them. Don't let them scare. Right.
Sorry, I was reading on ahead of everybody. You want me to keep reading?
Emily, did you want to read?
I can.
I stopped at 32.
Okay. "Don't be ridiculous," Saul replied. There's no way you can fight this Philistine and possibly win. You're only a boy, and he's a man of war, and he's been a man of war since his youth." But David persisted. "I have been taking care of my father's sheep and goats," he said. "When a lion or a bear comes to steal a lamb from the flock, I go after it with a club and rescue the lamb from its mouth. If the animal turns on me, I catch it by the jaw and club it to its unaliving. I have done this to both lions and bears, and I'll do it to this pagan Philistine too, for he has defied the armies of the living God. The Lord who rescued me from the claws of the lions and the bear will rescue me from this Philistine." Saul consented. "All right, go ahead," he said, "and may the Lord be with you." Then Saul gave David his armor, a bronze helmet, a coat of mail. David put it on, strapped the sword over, and took a step or two to see what it was like. He had never worn such things before. "I can't go in these," he protested to Saul. "I'm not used to them." So David took them off again. He picked up 5 smooth stones from a stream and put them in his shepherd's bag. Then, armed only with a shepherd's staff and a sling, he started across the valley to fight the Philistines. So I'm going to stop there because I feel like there's some stuff to kind of catch on to there.
So one thing that I kind of caught is that when you're in verse 39, David's reply to Saul when he tried putting on Saul's armor. In my version, it says, "I cannot go with these because I have not trained with them." And I thought that kind of sunk a little, that kind of resonated a little differently with me. Because, like, where is our training for this war that we're all involved? It's the Bible, right? Mm-hmm. So if we are not training with the Bible, we're not training right. We can't go into war without the proper equipment. And that's just something that kind of struck me the way that it was worded in mind.
So I want to go back up to where David is reminding Saul of the things that God has brought him through. And in my mind, all I can think is Saul had been through all these other battles where he has saw God take him through these. And David is so confident in God, in just overcoming and I say just overcoming a bear or just overcoming a lion. Like that's a big deal. But Saul has seen where God has helped him through many, many battles. All David needed to know is that whenever he was supposed to be protecting his flock, his sheep, the same as Saul supposed to be protecting his people. I feel like this is supposed to be a reminder to Saul about the Lord, who the Lord God is, the true living God. And Saul's like, okay. He's still not catching it. And so when I think about Saul giving David his own armor, and he's like, I can't go in these. I'm not used to them. It's because that's not the armor he needed. You know, he came in the full armor of God. If you're already wearing, I think that we need to remember that sometimes. If we're already wearing the armor of God, trying to put on somebody else's whatever is going to be too heavy.
Yeah, and it's going to mess up your walk like it did David.
Absolutely, because we've not trained in that.
Let that sink in. Instead of walking the walk or walking in the armor that God has been training you and equipping you in, when you try to walk in somebody else's, when you covet somebody else's and try to walk in what they have instead of what God has trained you in, it messes up your walk. You walk crooked, you walk funny, you lose your balance, you trip. That's good.
Starting at 41. Do you want me to keep going, or do you guys want to start reading? Yeah, I think it was 41 where I think I stopped there. Yeah, I stopped at 40.
Well, actually, you had brought up you had stopped at 40 and talked about the 5 stones.
Yeah.
You remember that thing I sent you about how
it was for the other brothers?
Well, I actually just read something that suggested that you may have actually had children. Goliath may have had kids just as big as he was.
Ooh, that's a good point. David is taking into consideration not just the one, but his lineage. But that shows you what kind of man David is. David would be the one that if somebody were to take out his father, they would have all his father's sons, or at least David, to also contend with.
I love how it says that he picked up 5 smooth stones from a stream and then put them into his shepherd's bag. Then armed only with his shepherd's staff and a sling. Like those stones aren't the weapon. It's the sling. And started across the valley to fight the Philistine. The rocks by themselves are nothing. The rock put into the correct sling in the right person's hand.
Everything.
I'll continue to read. We're in 1 Samuel chapter 17, verse 41. Then the Philistine came and approached David with the shield bearer in front of him. When the Philistine looked and saw David, he was contemptuous of him, for he was only a youth and reddish, with a handsome appearance. So the Philistine said to David, "Am I a dog that you come at me with sticks?" And the Philistine cursed David by his God. Okay, this is what I'm trying to wrap my head around. Goliath is talking this big talk about how they're going to take out this whole army. Yet he approaches David, this little boy, good-looking boy apparently. And while he's approaching him, I'm getting this image of him kind of being shielded by the shield bearer. Like if they're going to have arrows or anything like that, they ain't going to hit Goliath first. That's, to me, that's like kind of a wimpish kind of move, for somebody that has such a big mouth.
That's fair.
And then he curses David by his God's lowercase g. Like, that's like cursing him with nothing, right? Like obviously that didn't faze David any bit. So it goes on, continuing from verse 44. It said, the Philistine also said to David, come to me, and I will give your flesh to the birds of the sky and to the wild animals. But David said to the Philistine, you come to me with a sword and spear and a saber, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of armies, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defiled. This day the Lord will hand you over to me, and I will strike you and remove your head from you. Then I will give you the unalive bodies of your army to the Philistines this day, to the birds of the sky and the wild animals of the earth, so that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel. That's quite the threat. Like straight.
He took what Goliath said and just amplified it.
Yeah, turned it right around. Not only am I'm gonna do that to you, I'm gonna let God do that to you, and he's gonna use my hand to do it.
47 is, I think, my favorite verse.
You want to read it?
And that all these, because it's going on from what he said in 46. So in 46, in my version, it says, this day the Lord will deliver you up into my hands, and I will strike you down and remove your head from you. And I will give the unalive bodies of the army of the Philistines this day to the birds of the sky and the wild beasts of the earth. And all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel, and that all this assembly may know that the Lord does not deliver by sword or by spear, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hands. Like, David's not even taking ownership of anything. He's like, it's not going to be of me. I'm not the one doing it. I serve a mighty God, and he's going to be the one that does it. And then I'm going to get to do what you said you were going to do to me. Because David's young, and that's what he does. He taunts people back. What do young boys do?
I'm rubber, you're glue.
Yeah, they talk. Then it happened when the Philistine rose and came and drew near to meet David, that David ran quickly toward the battle line to meet the Philistine. So he didn't even back down. When the Philistine started to walk towards the battle line, David met him. But instead of meeting him, David amplified that. David didn't walk, he ran towards the battle line to meet the Philistine. David put his hand into his bag and took from it a stone and slung it. It struck the Philistine in the forehead. The stone sank into his forehead so that he fell on his face to the ground. So not only did it embedded his forehead, but instead of falling backwards, which he probably would have survived falling backwards, he fell forward onto his face, further embedding into his frontal lobe a smooth river stone. That's insane. I'm picturing that's probably with a 78-pound helmet. That was probably the only portion of his face that was not covered, was his forehead. I'm thinking David got him right between the eyes. That's incredible.
Or the maybe? It
said his forehead. Yeah, it said his forehead and mine. And then he fell on his face. So, I mean, if he fell forward on his face, that further just kind of, that's 78 pounds coming down to the earth.
My version is
further embedding this riverstone.
I think it knocked him out. And the reason that I say I think it knocked him out is because of verse 51.
Yeah, because in verse 50 it says, thus David prevailed over the Philistine with a sling and a stone, and he struck the Philistine and unalived him. But there was no sword in David's hand. Then David ran and stood over the Philistine and took his sword and drew it out of its sheath and unalived him and removed his head with it. When the Philistines saw that their champion was unalived, they fled. David's other children, or not David, but
like your version says that he was unalive twice. It said it in 50 and then again in 51.
Yeah.
Mine says he struck the Philistine and unalived him in 50, and then in 51 it says he finished it and cut off his. Yeah.
So in the NLT it says the stone sank in and Goliath stumbled and fell face down on the ground. So David triumphed over the Philistine with only a sling and a stone, for he had no sword. Then David ran over and pulled out Goliath's sword from its sheath, and David used it to unalive him and remove his head. So
three different versions saying three different things.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see.
But like I said, 78 pounds of bronze helmet on top of it. So a 10-foot man, our normal human head is about 8 pounds. We're going to give his head about 12 pounds, 12 to 14 pounds. So his head probably weighs 12 to 14 pounds on top of that 78 pounds, plus the pressure from the force of his weight coming down with the gravity and hitting the ground, I would assume is going to embed that stone so far into his forehead that is, being that the story, that's where it says that's what was Goliath's undoing. I think David removing his head is just doing what he said he was going to do. Back in 46, he told him, "I will strike you down and remove your head from you." And then in 49, 50, 51, he struck him down and then removed his head. But I believe that the stone being embedded in that frontal lobe in such a way, with all that weight and pressure coming down, I don't see anybody surviving that. That's an incredible amount of force.
So we'll have to ask him when we get up there. Hey, David, by the way,
when did his heart stop?
when did he officially exit life?
I think this teaches us something from the standpoint of Goliath too. If you think about it, in the sense, because think about how sure he was that he was stepping, and rightfully so, comparative. If you think about from the standpoint where he's at and the standpoint where David's at, he probably was not that concerned about whether or not his armor was completely covering what needed to be covered. Therefore, the rock was able to penetrate where the rock penetrated. He probably had his guard down a lot more so, because here's this little child, as he called him, this little boy running at him. You send me a stick? Like, what am I, a dog? You send me a stick? Come on, like, I'm Goliath. What are you doing? So you think about the fact that his guard was down, and so I think about that in the aspect of where we're at as followers. If we're not complete, like if we're not standing firm in the armor of God that we're wearing daily, and we look at something as just being small, and we're not really like making sure that we're protected, like we're keeping ourselves covered in the things that we need to cover at. That's how those little stones can become big penetration, like big hits on us. You know what I mean? Like those little things that we like not studying your Bible like you're supposed to, not praying some that you're supposed to. Those little things that may seem little at the time snowball into something where you're actually removing part of your protection, so that those stones that the enemy's throwing at you, which from Goliath's standpoint, the enemy was not that, like that was God coming at him. But I'm just saying that if you're looking at if you're putting yourself in that position as the Goliath, how many times have we been standing and thinking that something was, that's nothing, I'm not going to worry about that. Like so much so that we're not turning, and it could be just something as simple as turning around and saying, God, protect me here. And that's all it takes, you know? And so when we were talking about doing a study earlier, that's kind of what got put on my heart, is that we have something to learn about from Goliath here.
I like that. I like thinking about that side.
So, sorry, Mom forgot I was doing this. So I was just thinking that, like, I was like, God, like, what is it that we have to learn here? And he was like, you all talk about how great it is but you have something to learn here from the standpoint of Goliath too. Is that the reality is we see the glory of God because David was able to do what David did, right? Mm-hmm. But there's so many times that we are those Goliaths in our own moments, thinking, that's not that big of a deal, when in all honesty it is. It's, like as think about it, like even in like those little nudges of we should be reading our Bibles, that's not coming from the enemy, that's coming straight from God. If that, you know what I mean? Like that's a hit.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's just where I'm at on that.
I like that. That's beautiful.
And remember the deal that they had too? This is the funny part of the whole story. Like, you remember the deal they had? Like, if we're going to bring out our champions, right? And if our champion wins, you guys are our slaves. If your champion wins, we'll be your slaves. What happened when their champion, when Israel's champion won?
They ran.
They ran away.
They tucked tail and ran. So
because they weren't the one making those.
That they made.
They weren't the ones making. They didn't make that bargain. Goliath did.
But the
No.
Philistines were part of Goliath. Goliath.
Yeah, but Goliath.
He was.
Yeah, but that's what Goliath. Yeah, but that's what he was telling, and the Philistines are like, we ain't holding up what
That
he
moment
said.
they ran in fear, though. I don't think it was a matter of running in. Like they see this little child just ran out there and defeated the giant, the God that came with them, the one true God. I'd be scared to death and run too. Like nope, I don't know what's gonna fix to happen to me.
But it still
I can see
didn't
that.
lack of spine from the Philistines. You know what I mean? Like they could have said, no, we don't back up that. We don't back what he says. But they didn't. They're all for it until they lost.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what sparked them to flee. Then the men of Israel and Judah rose up and shouted, and they pursued the Philistines as far as the valley and to the gates of Ekron. And the Philistine unalive lay along the way to Sharam, even to Gath and Ekron. Then the sons of Israel returned from their close pursuit of the Philistines and plundered their camps. And David took the Philistines' head and brought it to Jerusalem, but he put his weapons in his tent. When Saul had seen David going out against Philistine, he said to Abner, the commander of the army, Abner, whose son is this young man? And Abner said, by your life, O king, I do not know. And the king said, you then ask whose son the youth is. So when David returned from the killing of the unaliving of the Philistine, Abner took him and brought him before Saul with the Philistine's head in his hand. Then Saul said to him, whose son are you, young man? And David answered, I am the son of your servant Jesse, the Bethlehemite. Really not a whole
Bethlehemite
there. Yeah. So after the Philistines ran their mouths and then they tucked tail and turned and ran, they were chased.
left all their stuff.
Yeah, they left them. You guys dropped something.
It's mine now.
Yeah.
David said, yoink.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah, it says here. So David took the Philistines' head and brought it to Jerusalem, but he put the weapons in his tent. So is it David put the weapons in his own tent, or did he put Goliath's weapons in Goliath's tent?
In the NLT, it said David took the Philistines' head to Jerusalem, but he stored the man's armor in his own tent.
Okay, cleared it up right there. So David kept Goliath's. So that wound up being like family heirloom.
So my question is, and I don't know the answer to it. It's actually a genuine question. Was this? Remember, there was a time that God had told them not to plunder, not to take just not to take the things from the.
He told it to Saul. That's why Saul got rebuked. That's
so
about at the very beginning when we first started today's live was how.
Yeah.
We gave a story to why Saul is no longer favored by God.
So right here, that's exactly like it says that they gave a great shout and rushed after the Philistines, chasing them as far as Gath, and then returned and plundered the deserted Philistine camp. David took the Philistines' head to Jerusalem, but he probably didn't know about that part, is what I'm guessing. No. Saul watched David go out and fight the Philistine. Anyway, I'm going to leave it at that. But I'm just saying that, like, didn't God give the command of don't plunder their stuff
for Saul?
For Saul,
yeah. Well,
right.
He told Saul to destroy everything of the Amalekites
because it was all evil. It was all
so detestable to the Lord. He did not want to see any bit of their existence anymore.
So this is the Philistines. So this is different.
Yeah,
this is different.
Okay.
This is God's. I don't want to say punishment, but God.
Yeah, I feel like this is a test. I sincerely feel like this was a test for Saul.
Yeah, it could have been. But Saul already failed his test when God told him to go wipe out the Amalekites, and he did.
Right, but how many tests did God really? I mean, like, I feel like God just doesn't give up. So, but the only reason I say I feel like that was a test for Saul was because it was 40 days that that Goliath came out and was like, "Hey, come on, fight me," So I feel like it was Saul.
Jesus.
And
for 40 days. He was led out to the desert to be tempted for 40 days, is what it says, which is important.
What about Daniel?
Because that means that the whole time he was out in the desert, he was kind of hanging out with the enemy, right?
Right, but I think
that's what I want to know
next week when we go into I think that like we're gonna get to see like how the two intertwine, but are completely different. And I'm pretty excited about that.
But I think the Israelites going through the desert,
With a test. Right.
as they had already proven themselves unworthy and kind of trying so hard to give them some slack.
God is constantly trying to get us to just quit our nonsense and turn to Him.
No, absolutely.
That's it.
Did you guys want to keep reading or what?
I think that was a good study.
Yeah, because really anything, if we continue reading from here, we'll have to read the entirety of Saul losing his mind.
Yep.
Because this is like the beginning of Saul losing his mind.
Yeah.
Thank you for hanging out with us and studying with us. We hope you join us next Monday at getupandpray.com.